Hey y'all, I'm Sully. My sponsor is in St. Louis, Harold. He was here for a conference, the Brazos conference. And the problem is, whenever I meet up with my sponsor, he has this tendency to find work for me to do. I get jobs. And so I was there and he was encouraging people to reach out to me to do AA stuff, to speak at meetings or whatever. And that's how I met Cade. So I'm really grateful to be here, and also thank you, John and Cade, for kind of showing me around the place. I just find this space to be really fascinating, and I just imagine it being really conducive to fellowship, and it also just reminded me of being in Akron, Ohio the first time, kind of seeing Sister Ignatia's picture, in particular the little sister of AA, and then seeing the modern art too. I find fascinating to think about the ways that what currently working the program looks like. And I'm from Dallas. That's where I got sober. And like I said, my sponsor's in St. Louis. My home group is the LeBranch Street group, which is in downtown Houston. I live in Sharpstown. I teach at a school near Hobby Airport. I've been in Houston the past 3 years. And so I'm here to simply talk about my experience, strength, and hope. And part of my hope too is that there's some element of my story that you can identify with, and that it can reinforce some element of your step one experience, and just also there's a way in which that we can become more connected, and that perhaps you can feel more connected to AA. And at the very least, that's what I look for when I'm reading a story out of the big book, or I hear someone's story. I love the way that it brings me back to step one and makes me feel, oh, okay, I belong. This is where I'm supposed to be. And my sobriety date is January 30th, 2016. And in terms of my childhood, I grew up in a middle-class family, Irish Catholic family. So when I came into the program, I had someone ask me, it was like, oh, what religion did you grow up? They said, are you Irish? And now you're alcoholic. And they said, you're a CIA member. I said, what? I'm not a CIA member. Yeah, you're a Catholic Irish alcoholic. You're a CIA member. So I have that to add to my resume. And so I grew up in a religious household. My dad was the one that was more religious. My mom, some of my earliest memories of my parents are my mom and her drinking. And she was more of an isolated drinker, where she would leave dinner early, go into her room, drink. And she was a wine drinker. And so I remember noticing that shift when, like, okay, mom's starting to slur her words. Okay, mom's drunk now, or we're at a family event and mom is now drunk and under the table, and someone needs to drive her home. I didn't have a concept of what an alcoholic was, but I knew there was some association between the way that alcohol would affect my mom. And fast forward today, she's in the program as well, and got sober shortly after I did in Dallas. And thanks to the program kind of talking to me about how it's not my job to proselytize or evangelize, it's my job to just show how the program works through my actions. She just kind of credits, and I was still living at home at the time, so she just credits seeing the transformation in me and then wanting to check out AA because of that. And growing up, I would say my claim to fame would be being involved in Barney, and because the headquarters were in Las Colinas in Dallas, and so I got involved in that, and I did a lot of acting and show business growing up. And so when I was reading the book for the first time, and it talks about how we are kind of we're the director, the actor, we're in charge of the lighting, everything, I could really relate to that, because I could relate to not only wanting to control everything, but being the center of attention and wanting the spotlight to be on me, and really wanting to please people, to make people laugh, to entertain people. And alcohol was a special sauce for me, in the sense that I could do kind of the comedic act or the performance that I wanted to do when I was under the influence of alcohol, to get that applause or appreciation that I was seeking. And throughout high school, I would say the kind of my first addiction before alcohol, and I think in a lot of the ways, was like actually being a part of the debate team was a big deal for me in high school. And when I say addiction, I just mean the way I was able to throw myself into doing research on the computer, because just in terms of dealing with what was going on at home and family dysfunction, that was my way out of it, was just to kind of lock myself in that world. So I did that a lot on the weekends, and then that's how I ended up going to the college that I went to. I ended up going to Boston College because I met the debate coach of Boston College at a tournament in Massachusetts. So I ended up in Boston, and my drinking didn't really take off until later in college. I was just kind of exposed to some of the normal drinking that went on into parties, but then I think it was pretty quickly I became a binge drinker, and the only natural way for me to drink was to pursue the blackout. Alcohol didn't make sense to me outside of wanting to black out, and there was just that sense of I have to drink as much as possible, and then when I stop drinking is when I'm not unconscious anymore. And I had a tendency to be a pretty clumsy drunk, and so falling down the stairs or getting into a playful fight but getting flipped over was pretty common. So I started to get a series of concussions. And so my solution at the time in college was, well, I need to figure out some kind of helmet device so I can drink the way that I want to. So I was kind of looking at different helmet designs on Amazon to see if that could protect me and allow me to drink the way that I wanted to. And then drinking for me at first, it allowed me to become that entertainer and kind of clean the mental slate. But then progressively I became more of a depressive drinker, where I would end up kind of curled up in the corner at a party. Or I remember vividly my senior year of college going to the window kind of in and out of a blackout and pulling the screen back, and my roommates looked at me and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm trying to get to the first floor." And I was on the 6th floor at the time, and it was just, that's what made sense to me. I needed to end it. The space that kind of drinking put me in, I became eventually a suicidal, depressive drunk, and then just the injuries that would come from it, like falling down the stairs or just waking up and not knowing how I got these injuries. And in particular, I remember coming back from a party. I mean, I'm in my dorm room my senior year, and I'm playing beer pong, but what I didn't realize is that I was passed out in the lawn outside in front of the dorm, and some good Samaritans just carried me to the elevator and brought me up. And next thing I knew, the paramedics are coming in, and they're trying to put me in the stretcher, and I don't understand why they're doing that, because I didn't realize that I was bleeding out of my face profusely. And when I read Bill's story for the first time, I had trouble identifying it. They're talking about like stocks in the 20s and riding on a motorcycle. I don't know where I really fit in. And I had a buddy of mine go, because there's this part of the story, I don't remember exactly, where I think Bill puts a mattress on the first floor, or he's sleeping on the first floor. And my buddy said, "Oh, that's kind of like you," and that there was this fear that you might jump out of the window, and for Bill, sleeping on the first floor was this preventative for him in a moment of suicidal angst, jumping out or something. And that was helpful for me to start to look at some of the similarities instead of just the differences. And so I graduated college, and I had some idea of, like, I wanted to do something vaguely service related. Didn't know what that would be. So I thought about the Peace Corps, going to Africa. I thought about Teach for America. My dream was to go to law school, but I had done nothing to prepare for taking the LSAT. It was grace from God that I was able to graduate from college. And what made the most sense for me was just to go back home and to be a volunteer at the high school that I had worked at, Jesuit Dallas. And my debate coaches had a spot for me to be a coach as well. And I would say that summer after I graduated from college was really important when I look back, and helping me realize that I wasn't a normal drinker. I didn't approach alcohol like most people did, because it was just really easy in college, or just at my age, to think, well, that's just the way that we drink at that age. It's just normal. I'm in my teens, I'm in my early 20s. How could you say I have a problem and I'm an alcoholic? And I remember being at a bar in San Francisco, in and out of a blackout, and I was staring at this couple and one of their parents, and I'm pretty sure it was one of those dates where guy or the girl, they were introducing the parents to either the guy or the girl. So the parents were meeting the boyfriend or girlfriend for the first time. And I was kind of awkwardly just staring at their glasses because one of them had taken about 2 sips out of a beer and they just left it there. And I was fascinated by the fact that they could just leave it there. That they just took 2 sips and then they were good. And then they would like come back 5 minutes later. And the whole time I'm just watching them. I'm glued to them. And I couldn't really wrap my head around the fact that someone wasn't like guzzling a beer or downing it, or just the pace at which they were drinking. I just could not understand. And I remember having an episode, like one of many episodes, like throwing up and then throwing up blood and going, I'm never drinking again. I'm done. I can't do this. Given what it's doing to my body, the effects, I'm becoming a kind of person I don't want to be. But then I'm doing this volunteer job, and I just have this revelation that I cannot drink the way I want to without risking brain damage. And that's what the doctors have told me. They said, hey, look, you're risking brain damage to keep drinking, because if you have another concussion, there's no guarantee you can recover like the way you did before. And so that lasts about 2 months where I'm just not drinking. I'm good. But then the thought crossed my mind that having a beer with lunch would be awesome, because I can just go back to they let the volunteers stay at a house behind the school. So I could just go back to the house, drink a beer, and I didn't start binge drinking right away, but pretty quickly I came back to that pattern of needing to black out the way I wanted to. And just a series of events happened that I can't really explain. Just God moments came together to get me into my first meeting. I'd say one big one was I like to read fiction, and there's this book called Infinite Jest, and the writer, David Foster Wallace, had spent a lot of time in AA meetings, and a lot of the scenes that he wrote about, the characters he came up with, had to do with his experience in AA. And I thought at the very least I could be like this author if I go to an AA meeting. This cool author that I admire, he went to AA meetings. I could go to AA under the pretense, like him, I'm an investigative journalist, just gathering stories, just gathering ideas, to get to know what it's like to be at an AA meeting that this guy keeps talking about. I also came across this video randomly. I wasn't even looking for it. I don't even know how an algorithm would have really known to capture it, but it was this video called The Chalk Talk. There's this priest talking about just alcoholism and the body and how it functioned, and I found it fascinating. And so eventually I call up an A group in Dallas, and I go, hey, look, I want to go back to Boston to go to this concert with some friends, but I'm pretty sure I won't make it back, because if I drink and drug the way I want to, I don't see myself surviving. So I said, could you get me sober in 2 weeks? And they said, well, that's not really, this lady very sweetly basically said that's not how it works. And so I show up at a meeting, and then I remember thinking to myself, this is where fun goes to die. I'm willingly signing a death sentence to end my life at 21, and I was not willing to say I was an alcoholic. I was checking it out. I actually would show up to meetings. I didn't have to wear a suit at work, but I would show up to meetings with a suit because I wanted you to know that even though I was there, I was still better than you, that I still had this sense of like, I look better, or I don't know. It was pride. It was totally pride. And then they passed around the basket, and I said, there it is, the pyramid scheme. They want my $2. And then I was also a little paranoid because I thought they were going to check for an alcoholic card or some kind of form of identification, because I thought they just let anyone come into a meeting. That doesn't make sense to me. So I felt a little insecure about that. And it took about 2 weeks for me to be able to say, like, yeah, I'm an alcoholic, when I would introduce my name. And one of the problems I had, I looked at step one and I said, okay, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. And then I thought about my story and I compared it to your stories, especially people that had drank more than me or older than me. And I said, okay, I'm probably 30% alcoholic. And if I'm not 100% alcoholic, why would I fully commit myself to this program that they're telling me I have to do for the rest of my life? It doesn't really make sense. And so And that, for me, is still a kind of thinking I have to battle today. This thinking of, well, I can work the program 30%, or I can work the program the way I want to, so I can just basically have the schedule I want instead of surrendering to AA. I worked with a guy about a year ago, and we were kind of talking about, he was 6 months sober, and he was talking about his schedule and how he was only willing to go to one meeting a week. And he said, look, I go to therapy this day, I go to yoga this day, I'm just going to one meeting a week. And I said, well, typically I said, I'll just share my experience that I was told to do 90 and 90 when I got into AA, especially my first year. That really worked for me. I think especially in your first year of sobriety, you should be going to more meetings than once a week. And this guy would not budge. And it was just amazing, the kind of people that God puts in my life to hold a mirror to me, because I've had that same thinking of I'm gonna do AA this much instead of fully doing AA, or my sponsor kind of gives me an expectation and I go, you know what, I'm gonna do 50% of that expectation. And what I'm really grateful early on in the program is that someone just came up to me and said, hey, you don't have a sponsor, would you be willing to work with me? Can I walk you through the steps? And I didn't really know what I was saying yes to, but I thought, here's this guy, he has a leather jacket, he rides a motorcycle, he's about my age, this guy seems pretty cool. You know what, why not? I'll do it. And at the same time, I'm starting to learn more about the disease, the way of thinking. And this metaphor, analogy of the allergy was really helpful for me. This idea that when I consume alcohol, I break out in cravings. And I thought, okay, that really explains my relationship with alcohol for so long, that I consume it, and then the only word that comes to mind is next. And I'm just dedicated to the next drink. And that's the only thing that's on my mind, and I can't stop. And I hear people say, when I'm not drinking, I'm discontent, but then when I do drink, I can't control it. And every time I drink, something bad doesn't happen, but every time something bad happens, it's because I'm drinking. I go, yeah, that kind of makes sense for me. And I was really wrapped up around the fact that I thought that people around me were more alcoholic than me, or that I didn't drink enough to really qualify as an alcoholic. And so hearing people say, not yet, was really helpful for me, because I could easily say, oh yeah, there are times I should have got a DUI that I shouldn't have got a DUI. I could easily never been in prison, easily could see how I could have gotten in prison. And I heard a joke early on in AA, hopefully I don't butcher it, but it really helped me. It had to do with two alcoholics going to a funeral. Let's just say Jim and Bob are at this funeral, and it's an open casket funeral. And so they look at the body of the guy that's in the casket, and Jim goes, dang, that guy looks terrible. What happened? And the other guy goes, oh, well, he was an alcoholic. The other guy goes, well, did he go to AA? The other guy responds, oh, no, he never got that bad. And it's how bad does it have to be before you go to AA? And I started to accept that, for me, I can't control what my bottom looks like, because I want this perfect bottom where, to kind of, as part of my ego, I get to say X, Y, and Z happened to me, which led to me going to the rooms. But the reality is, the card I was dealt was, I had these series of concussions. For me to drink more is to risk brain damage. And given what's happened, I got to a point where I could say for me to drink is to die at the end of the day, and that I've lost the ability of choice. And so that, for me, has really allowed me to surrender to step one. And when it came to step two, probably just because of my background in debate and worshiping my mind, I had a lot of trouble accepting the wording of step two. And even though it said came to believe a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity, I thought, unless I have 100% proof that God exists, I can't do step two, was the way I approached step two. And I was really hung up on that. And I remember hearing in a meeting a guy chairing it say, well, the disease centers in the mind. And I thought, well, that's not good for me because I kind of worship my mind, or my mind is like my ability to reason, to argue, whatever. And so I started to realize I couldn't trust my mind, myself, my power as much as I thought I could, that I had to start reaching for something outside of myself. And then my sponsor, I don't think it was him giving this like stunning, eloquent explanation of the program. It was just, he was so authentic and honest. And he said, hey, look, I believe in a higher power. It works for me. Can you trust that? And I thought, how could I not trust that? Or how could I not give it a shot? That like this guy obviously has been transformed. And so I'm a big believer in the power of testimony, and just the way that sharing stories about the way that our higher power works in our lives can do way more good, and it could be way more effective, I would argue, than trying to convince someone that there is a higher power. And so that gave me a little willingness. And I had trouble praying because I thought, well, how could I pray to something that I don't think exists and I haven't proven that exists? And I heard a lot of people talk about, well, fake it till you make it, just pray on your knees, and the thinking, the faith, the belief will follow the action. And I'm a firm believer in that. At least that's what worked for me. I had that sliver of willingness, and then a relationship with God started to happen for the first time, even though I had, and I hear a lot of people say this, and whatever their particular religious upbringing might be, but for me, even though I had gone to Catholic school, Catholic college my whole life, that it was AA. AA is what taught me how to talk to God. AA is what taught me how to pray and allow me to move beyond just thinking about God as an idea in a textbook. And I started to be able to talk to God and just ask God like questions and start to listen. And my sponsors started to teach me that posture of listening and prayer instead of just talking to God or having that kind of 5-second foxhole prayer. And I get to step 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over the care of God as we understood him. And what happened for me in a way that I didn't really expect was it really helped in terms of like vocation and career. And I thought at the time that I started to feel at the same time I was going through the steps, a powerful call towards to do ministry or devote my life to service. And that's what I started to do. At the same time I started to be sober, I wanted to devote my life to ministry and service. And I ended up in the same, I think, I could be wrong, but if Father Edward Dowling is right up there, with the group that he was a part of was the group that I started to join. And that's what brought me in Houston. Before that, after Dallas, that ministry group brought me to Southern Louisiana, and then St. Louis for 3 years, where I met my current sponsor, and now Houston. And my sponsors just echoed, yeah, I think you need to listen to where your higher power is taking you, and I just followed that. And when I got to the 4th step, one of the things I found really challenging about that is that I had a resentment towards everyone that I had ever met. From the guy who didn't shake my hand in the hallway, who I thought I deserved his respect, to my mom and her drinking, or my dad. And so I just remember feeling a little overwhelmed by that and thinking like, oh my gosh, I'm just writing every name that comes to mind. But then for the first time, realizing my part in some of these resentments, and then getting to fear, and then being able to see so clearly how much fear had dominated my life, and then getting to the sex inventory, and then just seeing that selfishness was everywhere, that it was never, at the end of the day, it was about me and what I wanted versus the other person. The other person's desires, concerns, well-being was not factoring into the situation. And I'm really grateful too, just my sponsor was someone I felt I could just share everything with. And so he was, like, I hear a lot of people say, my sponsor at the time when I did that 4th, 5th step was the first person I had ever just told everything. All those things that, whether I had consciously said I would never tell or unconsciously I would never tell, and just to get that out there and to not be chained down by that. And I found that each time I've gone through the 4th and 5th step, it's helped me see patterns, and it's helped me to get deeper in the way that I react and think about things. And the most recent time I went through that process, I took my kind of inventory list to God, and the conversation I had with God was God just saying, look at all of the obstacles that you have helped put up that prevent me from connecting with you, that you belong to me. And what fear, lust, and sexual inventory, what resentment does is it blocks that spiritual channel. And the work of the program, the work of AA is how do you clear that channel so you're connected to that power that keeps you sober but gives you the best life possible. And when I got to those character defects, it just helped me grow in a lot of awareness around certain behaviors that had just dominated so many behavior patterns that affect the way that I relate to people. Whether it's I think dishonesty for me was a big one too, not in the sense that I'm actively lying to people, but in the sense that I might not be stating how I really feel, or I have dishonest expectations of people in terms of how they are going to react. And so that's something that I still definitely look at today in terms of what does honesty look like in my relationships, because especially in friendships where I think for me a lot of my resentments have to do with guys I live with. So I always have lived, for the past 8 years I've lived in community, so I've always had other guys that I live with. So right now I live with 11 guys, and so typically I live with 11 guys, so I have 11 reasons to have resentments if I'm not careful. And a lot of them, and there tends to be a way that I am a part of the resentment. I remember just like walking to the kitchen, and there was a guy that looked at me, and he said, well, you look like a homeless person the way you dress. And I was just ruminating on this for a week. I was just so obsessed about it. And then until I prayed about it, I realized that, well, I first started it because I said he looked like he was dressing as a dad in a JCPenney catalog. So he was just reacting to me. But I wasn't considering that in my resentment. And that's often what happens. For me, it's just so representative of a lot of my resentments, where there's some kind of part I'm playing, and if not, then it's the serenity prayer, to just accept that I can't control something and to pray for that person. And the amends process was definitely the one that was scariest for me coming in the rooms. When I read those steps for the first time, I saw make direct amends to such people wherever possible, except where to do so would injure them or others. And I thought, whoa. You're telling me I have to go to someone face to face and admit what I've done wrong to them? That's terrifying. That for me it required a kind of courage that I felt I've never shown in my life. And it really came to be true that the unexpected always happened to me in my amends process, and I just felt overwhelmed by mercy in so many of my amends process, where I felt that so many people could kind of rub my nose in the wrong that I did, or use it as an opportunity to lay into me, and that just wasn't my experience. I remember going to my boss when I was a volunteer at that high school and saying, hey, I stole an iPad, I showed up later, I didn't show up to sub because I was hungover, or I was supposed to do parking duty at this game, and I came to the parking duty, but I was drunk at the parking duty. And he paused, and I could tell it really affected him because he didn't know that. And he said, God is merciful, and I'm going to be merciful to you. And that was really the end of the conversation. And for me, that I remember that a lot, because I also see it as it's now a responsibility for me to show that same mercy to people, the mercy that I've been shown. I need to show that to other people as well when they wrong me or don't treat me the way that I think that I should be treated. And I would say right now with my current sponsor, the 10 step has been really important for me. And he said, hey, one of the requirements for working with me is that you're gonna text me your 10 step, and what that's gonna look like is looking for when selfishness, dishonesty, resentfulness, lustfulness comes up, and also looking for gratitude and having your prayer list. And then that for me is been a way to keep me connected to my sponsor, but also to keep me honest, because I find that there's a way when I have a conversation or a phone call with my sponsor, it can be really easy to leave out stuff that, in terms of ways I should be living, I don't know. I just think, and sometimes I can overdo it in terms of telling on myself, but if I'm like, maybe I'm constantly showing up 10 minutes late to a meeting, and it's like, yeah, I'm still going to the meeting, but I'm missing the meeting before the meeting. And am I really prioritizing AA if there's this pattern of doing that? Or, other things that have come up in that fourth and fifth step that I'm trying to work on, just telling my sponsor, hey, I fell short on this happened. And then what I've found 9 out of 10 times is that I constantly receive that same mercy that I experienced through that whole amends process. And I'd say with that prayer and meditation, we sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him. That for me is a central part of the way that I live my life and stay connected to the program, in addition to meetings and working with alcoholics and being part of my sponsor and being connected to my sponsor. And I think what was transformative for me when I went through the steps for the first time was doing that silent hour of prayer after the fourth and fifth step and reviewing, is my program built on a solid foundation, or is it built on sand? But still having this problem with God and saying, God, I really want you to shake my hand right now before I can believe in you or believe that you can keep me sober. And I was praying in front of a couch, and I just heard this voice that said, if I was as real or as firm to you right now as this couch that you can touch, then what would be the point of faith? And there's that for me, but not to mention the reality that when every time I shake someone's hand in the room, my faith tells me that my higher power is working through those people and that I'm connected to people through that. And what prayer looks like for me today, the program has helped me be so much more God conscious, where I'm able to start my day with prayer, but then also to talk to God throughout the day. And there's also a way in which it's helpful for me to anticipate ways that I lose my serenity and peace. So right now I work at a high school, and the serenity prayer is really important for me because I can't control high school seniors that are about to graduate. But I can be up at night thinking there's that girl who is going to ask me to go to the bathroom 5 minutes into class, and she's going to leave for 20 minutes. And yeah, I can create structures and routines around that, but I can't control that Ruby's just done with school right now, and I'm not her savior. I'm here to teach her if she's ready, and I'm here to do my best job, but I can't control this person. It can be really tempting, I think with any profession, but the one I'm in right now, thinking about with grades and contacting parents, this idea that, I can control the way that this person's experience of education, versus just kind of setting the table and seeing if they're willing to partake in that experience. The other one for me where I really need the serenity prayer is the copier room, because the papers get jammed a lot, and I basically, it's kind of a Jekyll and Hyde thing for me, where I'm just so embarrassed at how impatient and upset that I can become. So when I'm in my spiritually fittest state, I just say the serenity prayer before I enter that room to prepare myself. Or even just in the morning as I'm kind of previewing the day, I'm going I'm going to enter the copier room. I know this is going to get me super rattled, and I need to let go and know that 6 years from now, it's probably not going to have a defining impact on my life. And in terms of having a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, for me, I've always related more to the educational experience, the way that the big book talks about that, and being able to learn and realize over time the ways that I've awakened spiritually. I'd say a big one for me has been around step 1, and I found that I needed to go through that step with multiple sponsors before I could surrender the way I wanted to. And what helped me a lot was once I put it on pen and paper, where have I been powerless over alcohol? Where has my life been unmanageable? The evidence sunk in for me that, okay, yeah, I can't control my drinking, and that there's just two paths. It's either going back to drinking, which is for me going to death, or to go forward, which is to new life. And that's what the program is for me, new life. And two things that my sponsor is really big on. He talks a lot about going to places where you don't want to end up and sponsoring other people. And that's something, the sponsoring part is something that I know right now is missing from my program. And I felt that when I've been in different cities, there's been better experiences of sponsoring guys. But that's when the program has come alive with me. It's also been an experience of reminding myself that I'm not that person's savior too, that I'm here to accompany and walk with that person, but I can't ultimately make that person stay sober or make sure that that person makes kind of the life decisions that I want to. I was working with a guy in Dallas, and I remember he had decided to sign away custody for his kids, and he didn't have to per se. He just said, the way that I interpreted it was, he said that he didn't want the responsibility of doing it. And I remember feeling helpless in that. I was thinking, oh, why did you do that? No, you should want to be a father. But that wasn't, number one, I had never been a father. And so I'm very careful when I'm sponsoring guys to not speak to things that I haven't had the experience of. But then number two is that ultimately I didn't have control over what that person's decision was in that moment. And another thing I'll just say, going back to prayer, kind of what prayer looks like for me right now is reviewing my day and trying to do prayer that's reflective. So asking, where's my higher power been in my day? And then what that does for me is the next day I start to become more aware of where God is, and I try to live certain moments and encounters, especially with students, as prayers, where I start to realize that a student that's asked me the same question 3 times, if I can respond patiently, that becomes a prayer, my moment of patience. And I'm also so grateful for the ways that what I've learned in AA has helped me minister to people, not just to alcoholics. I remember I had a student that came to me recently, and she was just paralyzed by fear because of a health scare. She was going to basically go to a screening to see if she had breast cancer because of a lump that she had, and she really couldn't focus in class. And I think what God was speaking to me at that moment when I was talking to her was to just do a fear inventory. So we just got out the paper and the columns, and it's like, what are you afraid about? Why are you afraid about it? What does self-reliance look like? What does God-reliance look like? And then just having a conversation of how could you live in that God-reliance column? Not to ignore the fear and the possibilities, but I could really relate to that in the moment because of the worst case catastrophizing too, because she didn't know at the end of the day what it was going to be, and she ended up later on, she had a biopsy and it was benign. But I could totally relate to the fact that if I have anything that's health related, that I jump to worst case scenario, that like I got a bladder issue, then I have cancer, and I'm thinking about funeral arrangements is what's going on in my head. I just get there really, really quick, where I started having feet issues, and then I'm just thinking like, okay, how am I going to adjust to life in a wheelchair? And so I really have to slow down and put pen to paper with my fears. But then also at the same time, I found that it's a balance, because I have to stay in gratitude just as much, if not more, as being aware of where my fears are for me. And when I think about AA, one of the words that I heard that I really like is the word scaffolding. I heard someone, I had stopped, it was about 6 years ago, and I wasn't going to meetings as frequently as I should have been, and someone reminded me that, hey, AA is your scaffolding. Why are you throwing away your scaffolding? And what I took that to mean is that everything in my life builds off of AA. Everything in my life. And people will ask me sometimes, they go, well, like, you're doing ministry full time, you're involved in church, you're doing seminary stuff, like why do you need AA? And I go, well, when I go to AA, I'm with alcoholics. And that's how I identify with other people. At least for me, I found that I will forget that I'm an alcoholic unless I'm around other alcoholics. And then unless I'm hearing their stories consistently, actively, I will convince myself that I am not as bad as you. I will convince myself that I don't need the program as much as you. And then I get the fellowship, because I do agree with the people who talk about how much the disease is about separation. And that's what started to be so life-changing for me, and so much light came into my life when I came into AA, because I started to hang out with people outside of the meetings. I started to go to dinner with people outside of the meetings, and I was with a bunch of drunk people and realizing, okay, I can laugh, I can have dinner, I can have a burger, and I don't have to have beer. I don't have to have beer around me. I don't have to be chugging shots of whiskey or vodka. And so it just totally changed the way I thought about life, because I thought I couldn't imagine life without alcohol. But now I can't imagine life without AA. I was paralyzed by anxiety when I came into AA, because it started to sink in that I would have to go to meetings for the rest of my life. Like, you're telling me that for the next 80 years I'm going to be, if I live, that long, you're telling me that I'm going to be in meetings that long, and now I can't picture my life without it being structured around AA. And thank you all for inviting me to be here. It's great to be here. It helps me stay committed to the program, to be here and to share my story. So thank you.
Yeah. Negative. All right, let's give another round of applause for Sully. Thank you very much.